To achieve early retirement, it all starts with a plan. Unless you have a financial plan in place, you're not going to have anything to aim for. There's going to be no structure or steps you can follow. You'll just be hoping for the best and probably focusing on things you can't control. So in this video, I'm going to take you through a live demonstration of building a financial plan, showing you the steps that you can control so that you're in a position to retire early. My name's Carl Roberts. I'm a regulated financial planner. Welcome to the channel. In these videos, I'm trying to help you, show you ways to achieve true financial independence so you can really enjoy your life. We cover topics such as retirement planning, investments, pensions, and tax saving tips. In this video, I'm going to be using special financial planning software from our friends at CashCalc. Okay, so let's dive in and build our financial plan here. So here we've got some pretend clients, Joe and Jane Blogs, and they're keen to retire at age 60. So the first thing you're going to need to do when building a financial plan is to come up with some assumptions. Now, the first assumption is going to be around your life expectancy. So now we're all living a lot older than our parents. You need to have an end point on this plan because otherwise you don't know how long you need your savings and your income and things in retirement is going to last. So one thing you could do is obviously check the National Average Life Expectancy calculator, and that will throw up your life expectancy for your current age. So in this particular example, we have Joe's currently 52, Jane is 53, and the National Statistic Life Expectancy average is 87 for Jane and 84 for Joe. Now, the problem with this is that life expectancy is very dependent on the level of wealth you have and also the area where you live in. So naturally, if you've done well for yourself and you've got more wealth, you're probably going to live a bit longer. So in the assumptions, I always think go into when your age 100 is a nice, easy kind of measure to use. Most people aren't going to get to age 100, but just builds in that bit more risk protection to your plan there. The second assumption you're going to need to make is around inflation. So obviously over time, the costs of everything we buy and use is going to go up. And it's important that your money in retirement goes up along with it. So we need to build in and assume that the things you're going to buy are going to be increasing over time by inflation. So if you go back through and look at the Bank of England's historic sort of inflation calculator, you can see that the average rate of inflation over the last 20, 30 years is around 2.5%. So we're going to use 2.5% as our inflation assumption in here. And obviously there's two different metrics for inflation. The main one is CPI, so the Consumer Price Index, the basket of goods. The Retail Price Index, the RPI, is an older measure of inflation. It does include more housing costs. So that's usually a bit higher, so we'll leave that at 3%. Also, we're going to make an assumption on how much earnings are going to increase, because at the moment, Joe and Jane Blogs, they're still working. So, they will still be paid salaries and things. And it's reasonable to assume that those levels of income will go up over time. So again, if we look at the national average earnings over time, about 2.5% is a reasonable figure to assume there. And finally, on the assumptions front, you need to build in a level of growth for your savings and your investments and your pensions. So it's not majorly important what level of growth you assume at this stage. What's more important is the difference between inflation and cash and savings. So, for example, if you've got your money in cash, the rate of return on cash should be a lot lower than the rate of return on stock price investments. The same with inflation. Inflation is generally higher than kind of cash interest rates. But if you're investing in share markets, then you'll likely find that rate of return should probably be double the rate of inflation. So in this particular plan, I'm going to use a 1% annual return for cash and a 5% annual return for any investment accounts in the plan. And that's trying to factor in basically a balanced, portfolio of stocks and bonds. But we're going to go into more detail on these rates of returns later on in the video. Okay, at this point, it's usually a good idea to make a note of when your state pension age is. So you can go onto the government state pension forecast website and just type in your date of birth, answer a few questions, and it will tell you when your state pension age is. So for Joe, his state pension age is going to be 66. And for Jane, her state pension age is going to be 67. Now, as I said earlier, they both want to retire at age 60, or when Joe is age 60. So Jane will be 61 at that point. Okay, so now we have to start pulling together all of your financial information. So things like your income, your savings accounts, your expenses, your pensions, any debt you've got, all that stuff now needs to be collated, and so you're clear what you've got. So I'm going to add a few counts into the plan here. So Joe and Jane have a joint savings account in cash. So that's got about 50,000 in it. Coming back to the growth assumption, because it's cash, we're going to assume a 1% a year return on that. Joe's also got his own cash savings, and he's saved around 25,000 into a cash ISA. Again, we'll assume a 1% annual growth rate on that. Jane also has a cash ISA, and she's also got 25,000 in that, growing at 1% a year. They've also got a stocks and shares ISA. So Joe's got an investment ISA, and that's currently at 28,000. And because it's invested in a balanced fund, we're going to assume a 5% growth rate for that. And Jane also has a stocks and shares ISA, and that's £32,000 currently, also with a 5% growth rate because it's in that balanced fund again. So that's their kind of cash and investment position there. So next, moving on to their pensions. So Joe has a pension through work, which he pays into and they pay into. It's currently valued at 320,000. And again, it's in a balanced fund, so 5% growth rate to keep things really simple at this stage. Jane also has a pension through previous employment and a fund, and that's currently worth 180,000. Also, again, in a balanced fund, growing at 5% a year. Okay, so we said earlier, obviously, it was a good idea to check your state pension age. It's also a really good idea to get your state pension forecast, which you can from the government state pension forecast website. So this forecast will tell you exactly how many years pension contributions you've got for your, national insurance contributions you've got for your state pension record. It will forecast what you're due and whether you've got any gaps and what you need to do to make up. Because if you're planning on early retirement, that could be that you don't actually qualify for the full state pension because you've got missing years. You're not working long enough to get the full state pension. Now, there could be ways you can top this up. So it's worth looking into that. And I've done separate videos and articles on that. So Joe and Jane both have full state pensions due, so we can add in their current state pension forecasts to the plan. Okay, next, moving on to current income. So Joe's working, he's employed, he's currently on a salary, gross salary of 130,000 a year. And we're going to carry on, assuming he's received that up until his planned retirement age of 60. And Jane is in fact self-employed, and she is currently earning profits of £67,000 per year. And we'll assume that she's obviously going to be doing that self-employed work until she retires with Joe at age 60. Okay. So moving on to their spending. So currently, they've still got their mortgage that they're paying off. But one of the reasons they want to retire at 60 is because the mortgage is due to complete at age 60. So their spending per month at the moment is currently £6,000. So they're going to plan to carry on doing this until age 60. And remember, we spoke about inflation earlier. We're going to assume that this spending level keeps increasing by inflation each year. However, once they hit retirement, because their mortgage is paid off, they're planning to spend a little bit less, or maybe a bit more, but not factor in mortgage. But their target is basically £5,000 per month in retirement. Now, it's worth spending quite a bit of time on your expenses and really focusing on what you want to do in retirement and how much that's going to cost. I often find most people tend to underestimate what they're going to actually spend in retirement. And some people find it really hard to comprehend what their level of spending will be, as they don't know day to day what their life's going to look like. Now, as a starting point, I would always say, look at and be clear on what you're spending now, because it's pretty obvious that once you hit retirement, you're going to want to at least maintain your current lifestyle and the spending that you do now. Also, a really good resource is the retirement living standard research, as this has come up and done lots of research on lots of people's different retirements, and they've put people into kind of brackets, and they say what's a minimum retirement, a moderate retirement, and a comfortable retirement, and it will list what this looks like. So for a minimum retirement for couples, they say that could cost around £22,400 per year. For a moderate retirement, it's £43,100 per year. And for a comfortable retirement, it's £59,000 per year. But just remember, whatever figures you use for your retirement spending, always factor in that inflation increase. So just finally, on the building of the data into this plan, we're just going to add a pension contribution for Joe, because he currently gets work pension contributions. And this is classed as employer contribution because he pays it through sort of salary sacrifice. So it's going in as a gross contribution. So if he continues working until 60, he'll get that going in all the way to 60. And we're going to assume that keeps increasing with average earnings. So even just the process of gathering all your financial data, all your pension accounts, your savings accounts, your income, and looking at your spending is going to be a very valuable process in your own right, because it's going to allow you to start getting organized and really tidy things up so it's much easier to manage. For example, you might have multiple different pension pots from lots of different previous employers. Do you really keep all those pensions separate, or could you start to bring them all together and combine them into one pension, which you then invest and manage much more closely? Do you have lots of little bits of money saved in different kind of interest accounts, cash ISAs, what you've just sort of let drift after the initial fixed rate of interest is finished? So we've done all the data gathering part. Let's look for the first time how this plan's actually looking. Is it achievable for Joe and Jane to be retiring at age 60? So we're going to show their expenses. So we know, that their expenses currently are around £72,000 a year, but that includes the mortgage. So when that mortgage is paid off, they're planning to spend that sort of £5,000 a month, so £60,000 a year, and that's what they want to continue maintaining retirement all the way up to age 100. So obviously they're currently working. So they've got plenty of income coming in through work. So we can see that their cash flow, their actual income coming into the plan, is far exceeding their expenses at the moment. So obviously a good starting point. But obviously that's all going to stop at age 60 when they plan to retire. Now, they are going to be due full state pensions at state pension age. So we can add that to the plan. So that gives a bit of foundation to retirement income there, but it's not going to start until they're kind of 66, 67. So there's quite a bit of time to go until that kicks in. They've also then got their other savings that they can use, their ISAs, and they've got their pensions, which can all be used for, to provide income in retirement. Now, the problem with looking at this plan straight away, and hopefully you've noticed, is that all of this income from the pots, so the savings and the pensions, seems to stop when it gets to age 82, 83. So if we just have a look at the savings and the pots, we can see that, yes, they do in fact all run out by the time it gets to 82, 83. And so, there's a massive shortfall there in the client's plan. So look at this first view. It appears that Joe and Jane can't in fact retire at age 60 if they continue on the current path they're on. So if this is the case for you, when you start putting your own plan together, it looks like perhaps your dream of early retirement doesn't look possible. At this point, don't despair. There are a few levers that you can pull to potentially change this situation. And I'm going to go through these now. Okay, so the first thing you could do is to have a look at your spending in retirement and even spending now. Is there a way you could make some cutbacks in retirement so that you're still able to retire at 60, but perhaps you're not spending as much as you previously planned? How important is the actual date you retire rather than the lifestyle you retire in? Because for most people, you probably could retire a lot earlier than you think if you were happy to live, on less. So you just need to decide, is that important to you or not? I mean, this particular scenario we're going to do here, it's quite fundamental that Joe and Jane, they want to spend this £5,000 a month. They've got plenty of things planned, so there's no way we can kind of cut spending in this particular plan. But for you, it might be. The second thing to look at is obviously your income side of things. So rather than obviously finish work completely at age 60 like Joe and Jane here, is there scope for you to maybe sort of transition into retirement, perhaps go part-time, do less hours at your aimed target retirement date, so that you're still bringing in a bit of income in the early years of retirement, which means there's less reliance on your pots to fund you. Alternatively, is there some income that you can actually earn in retirement? Airbnb, for example, if you're planning to do quite a bit of holidays, is your house going to be, unoccupied for large periods of time? Could you make some money off that by listing it on Airbnb? Also, things like dog walking, Rover app is a really good resource where you can, make money in retirement just through a bit of dog walking. So if you like dogs, things like that. So in this particular example, I'm using, Joe and Jane again. They don't want to be doing any additional work in retirement. They just want to be out enjoying themselves. So there's no scope for kind of having some income into that retirement plan. The next thing is obviously to try and increase the pot size, what you're putting in, because obviously we know, Joe and Jane, they've got a few years to go until they want that planned retirement. And we know they've got quite a lot of excess over what they're spending currently. So could we put that to more better use by making some more contributions? So let's look at pension contributions, for example. Joe's quite comfortable. He thinks, he's going to do another £200 a month on top. So we're going to add another £200 to Joe's pension every year. So let's just see what kind of difference that makes. Also, let's add a contribution into Jane's pension. So, Jane thinks she can add some to hers, start paying in, because she's not currently at the moment. So she's going to do £200 a month into hers as well. So let's just see what that's done to the plan. So previously, the plan was running out at age 82. And then we can see that actually, it does sort of lengthen the term of the plan, but not by much. It's given them another year or two before the pot runs out again, but it does still definitely run out. So that little lever pull there has not made a huge amount of difference. So they might have to go back and look at income spending again and see if they can add any more to the pot. And just on pension contributions in particular, remember that I said earlier in the video, it's really important that you check your state pension position. So if you have got missing years, for a small one-off lump sum payment, they may allow you to top up your state pension to the full level. And again, that can make a difference to your early retirement strategy because it's giving you more income in retirement. It's also a good idea to keep an eye on how much cash you're holding in your overall portfolio. again, there can be a tendency, some people want a lot of cash because they feel it's safer. But remember, cash is not going to grow as much as your investments over time, and probably not even beat inflation. Now, it is important to hold some cash in retirement as an emergency fund, but you don't want to hold too much. So it's important you work out what's the right amount for you, because investing more of your cash, again, could help boost the overall plan and make sure you can make withdrawals for longer. Now, another change you can make to your financial plan to improve the position to ensure that you can retire early is to look at your investment choices. So the underlying funds or shares, whatever you've picked to invest your pension and your stocks and shares ISA into, is to have a look at what you've picked to see if improvements can be made there. Now, it's common to think that as you approach retirement, you should be taking less risk with your investment choices. However, this is actually the wrong approach to take, because remember, your pension and your investments may need to last 30 plus years. And clearly, the earlier you retire, the longer it's going to have to last. So you need that growth above inflation to ensure that the pot lasts with you. Now, if we're looking at a couple of different investment options here, based on results from the last 20 years, do you want to be invested in something that's grown at an annualized rate of around 8.4%? Or do you want something that's grown at 2.7%? Now, this is the difference between a global equity fund sector or the UK gilt fund sector. So global equity is going to be 100% shares across the great businesses of the world, whereas the UK gilt, although is seen as safe and a cautious strategy, it's going to be invested in lending to the UK government at a fixed rate of interest. But you can see the returns are wildly different. A higher rate of return, whilst it may be volatile in the short term, it will potentially allow you to spend more in the long run as your investments go further. Okay, so on that basis, I'm going to make a few tweaks to Joe and Jane's investment strategy. So rather than a balanced fund, I'm going to put them into a global equity fund. And so now we're going to assume rates of return of around 8% a year based on the historical average. Now, remember, past performance is obviously no guarantee of future performance, but it's a good starting point. So we're going to adjust their stocks and shares ISA. So they're now growing at 8% a year. And we're also going to adjust their pensions, invest them in a global equity fund as well, so that that grows at 8% as well. Now, let's look at the difference that's made. Now, you can see now on this particular plan, there's no gaps. We can see cash flow income coming in from withdrawals from the pots lasting all the way to 100. So if we just look at what the pot values are doing, it looks that as in fact, they're now no longer spending enough in retirement. Those few tweaks that we've made to the increase in pension contributions and the change of investment risk level, putting more money into global equities and getting that better return, has in fact ensured that their pots, their pension pots and their investments are going to keep growing throughout retirement. They'll end up potentially dying with too much and not spending enough. So the few tweaks we've made there has actually made their early retirement plan possible. Okay, the final major tweak you could make to your financial plan to ensure early retirement is actually the withdrawal strategy you use in retirement. So this means taking money out of your different pots at different times, making use of the various tax allowances that are available to you. Because tax saved is more money in your pocket, which means more money you can use for spending in retirement. So for example, if you're retiring way before your state pension retirement age, so in Joe and Jane's case, it's sort of 6 or 7 years before they're going to get their state pension, there's a window there where they've got no other income, which means they could take taxable withdrawals out of their pension, which you would usually pay tax on. But because they've got no other income, they can limit the withdrawals to the amount of the personal allowance. And the personal allowance does not have any income tax applied to it. So they could make much more tax efficient withdrawals on their pension in that small window, and then potentially relook at things once the state pensions do start paying out. And if you're in a couple, that's 2 sets of personal allowances you can use, which at the time of filming is around £12,500 each. So that's nearly £25,000 of tax-free income you could take out of your pension. Even if you don't need the income because you have got income from other sources that's not subject to income tax, you could recycle this money into ISAs, for example. Other examples could include making use of your dividend and capital gains allowance. So if you've got investments that are perhaps outside of an ISA or a pension, you could sell them at strategic points in time, and whilst they may have a gain on, and you normally would pay capital gains tax, you could just sell enough to make use of your capital gains tax allowance. Same with dividends. Take enough dividends or invest in a way that just produces enough dividends to keep you under that dividend allowance. Now, although it's difficult to do without specialist financial planning software, it is important that you stress test your withdrawals in retirement using realistic investment return rates. Now, in the plan we've been building live here with Joe and Jane, we've been using what we call linear investment returns. We've just been using an average growth rate. It was 5%, then we took it up to 8%. But of course, the stock market doesn't work like this. It doesn't go up in straight lines. Some years, the market's going to fall quite significantly. Some years it's going to go up quite significantly. And the timing of your withdrawals is going to be really important, because if you need to make quite a lot of withdrawals in the early stages of your retirement and you've suffered really poor returns just because the market happened to have fallen at that point in time, it's going to have a really long-lasting damaging effect on your portfolio. It could potentially ruin things in retirement. So it's really important we stress test what you're trying to do. So what we're going to do is use some special financial planning software from our friends at Timeline, who have got access to the last 100 years of global capital market data. So that includes things like real interest rates, real stock market return data from all different asset classes, even in cash interest rates as well. So we can factor that in and run the plan across multiple different decades and see how it actually would have worked out based on real historic scenarios. So, although we've said before, past performance is no guarantee of future returns, but it's all we've got. So at least we're building a bit more realistic assumptions into the plan. So having copied across the same data we had in the previous software, and what we've done now is we've run the financial plan and the withdrawal strategy and everything through the realistic assumptions and market return data. And we can see here that obviously there's lots of different scenarios that might work out, but the median scenario here is saying that potentially everything runs out at 95, 96, and actually quite a few scenarios run out even earlier. So in fact, the actual plan that we started off with before we made any of those tweaks only had a 47% success rate based on the 720 scenarios that we've tested it in. But now if we flick over to the second plan where we've made those few tweaks, so remember we added a little bit more on the pension contribution side for Joe and Jane, and also we changed that investment strategy to be a little more aggressive, more allocation to global equity investments. And you can see now running through the testing scenarios that they're in a much stronger position. It looks like the median scenario, they should be absolutely fine, again, with probably way too much money than they need. And in fact, this gives them now an 87% success rate. So we can be quite confident in that, even though it's based on past performance, but it's using realistic kind of return rates. So now Joe and Jane can decide. They're in the lucky position of, right, actually, can we retire maybe even a little bit earlier than planned, or maybe spend more in retirement? So hopefully you can see there with that live example that with just a few tweaks and looking in the right areas, focusing on things that you can actually control, it's more easier to achieve early retirement than perhaps you thought possible. The key is, deciding what's important to you. How much can you live off? How much risk are you prepared to take with your investments? Once you're really clear, you can make those tweaks to your plan and hopefully retire early and really enjoy yourself. I hope you found that video useful. If you do have any comments or questions, please drop them in the comment box. If you have got some value out of the video, please give it a like on YouTube. And also don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because there's lots more videos coming soon. And that way you won't miss any. Until next time, take care.